If the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand lit the fuse of war in Europe, then the sinking of the Lusitania was the moment that jolted the United States awake. In the early years of the conflict, Americans watched the war from a distance. President Woodrow Wilson declared neutrality, and many citizens believed that Europe's quarrels should not be America's concern. But on May 7, 1915, when a German submarine attacked a British passenger liner carrying Americans on board, neutrality suddenly felt far more fragile. The RMS Lusitania was no ordinary ship. A marvel of modern engineering, she was one of the fastest ocean liners in the world, capable of crossing the Atlantic in under a week. On her final voyage, she left New York City bound for Liverpool with nearly 2,000 passengers and crew. Among them were more than 120 Americans, families, businessmen, even children, who saw the crossing as a routine journey despite Germany's recent warnings about the dangers of traveling to Britain. Just off the coast of Ireland, the Lusitania sailed directly into the sights of a German U-boat. At 2:10 p.m., a single torpedo struck the ship's side. The explosion was followed by a massive second detonation, and within 18 minutes, the pride of the Cunard Line slipped beneath the waves. Of the 1,959 people on board, 1,198 perished, including 128 Americans. Survivors described scenes of chaos, lifeboats capsizing, desperate families clinging together, children separated from parents in the panic. Newspapers around the world ran harrowing accounts, with the New York Times calling it an outrage against humanity. The attack shocked the United States. For many Americans, it was the first time the war had felt personal. Women and children from their own country had been killed, not soldiers, but civilians, victims of what seemed like ruthless aggression. Germany defended the action, claiming the Lusitania had been carrying munitions, an allegation that contained some truth. But in the court of global opinion, the justification mattered little. The image of innocent lives lost at sea had already shaped public outrage. President Wilson found himself in a delicate position. He condemned the attack but stopped short of declaring war, instead sending strong diplomatic protests to Germany. Many Americans still wanted to avoid entanglement, but the mood had shifted. The sinking of the Lusitania planted the seeds of anger and suspicion that would grow over the next 2 years, making U.S. entry into the war not a question of if, but when. For a U.S. audience, the story of the Lusitania resonates for several reasons. It was an American tragedy within a European war, a moment when the Atlantic Ocean suddenly felt much smaller. It raised moral questions about the rules of warfare, civilian safety, and the cost of neutrality. And it demonstrated how quickly the deaths of ordinary people could push a nation toward conflict. In hindsight, the sinking of the Lusitania stands as one of the most pivotal events in the path to American involvement in World War I. More than a century later, it is remembered not only as a maritime disaster, but as a turning point of conscience. The Americans who died that day were not soldiers, yet their fate shaped a nation's decision to eventually take up arms. The Lusitania reminds us that wars are never confined to battlefields. They reach into the lives of civilians, families, and children, altering history in ways no one aboard that ship could have imagined.